So welcome everybody to this City Planning Committee meeting for the 31st of August. We have a full complement of committee members. We also have Mr Neil Noy, Ms Karen Abbey and Ms Sarah White and Kwan Pei Choi as council officers to assist us, as well as David Banks, who's the committee liaison or committee support. So thank you. We don't have any apologies or leave of absence. Can I have somebody confirm the minutes from last time, please?
So moved.
Oh, thanks, Councillor Harvey. Is there any dissent? No dissent. I'll take that as carried. Item 3 is consideration of supplementary items. We don't have any. Item 4 is indications of pecuniary or conflicts of interest. No conflicts? No. Okay. Item 5, transfer of agenda items. No transfers. Okay. Item 6, planning authority items, considerations of items with deputations, and we have one. Have somebody move that, please.
I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Thanks, Alderman Barakas. Any dissent? There's no dissent. Good. So we go to item 7.1.2, which is 26 Fitzroy Place, Sandy Bay. So, Glenn, could you let Mr Nick Masters and Mr Dermot Crane in, please, from the waiting room? So your audio's connected. Hello, Mr Masters and Mr Crane. Welcome to this committee meeting. So we've opened the item 7.1.2 and you have 5 minutes to put your case, Mr Masters, and then we'll hear from Mr Crane after questions to you. Go ahead if you want to take your mute button off.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much for the committee's time. I guess to a large extent, I'm just reiterating what Council's engineering, heritage and planners have come up with in recommending the proposal for refusal. From a design, I mean, that's subjective. I think Council's heritage officer pretty much covered that, but I mean personally, they're just for an estate or a magnificent house like that, they just seemed a really ad hoc and without any architectural statement or planner's report. I found it difficult to sort of draw any kind of a nexus between the design and what was trying to be achieved. But I guess from potential residents of 3 to 4 Montgomery Court, and less subjectively, the parking and the access for the proposal was fairly concerning. There just didn't seem to have been much thought from an engineering perspective in accessing and availability of parking. So there's one short of required parking for the proposal, but concerningly, there's limited parking in Montgomery Court anyway. I think there's 11 available public parking spaces and 3 non-time spaces. And the nature of the design was that with a sort of 8-metre new crossover and a relocation of a crossover would effectively take away 3 non-timed public parking spaces and an additional 1 2-hour parking space. So effectively losing or taking 40% of the available public parking spaces, which service, I think there's 21 current residences in Montgomery Court. There's no parking immediately outside in Regent Street. And I guess in addition to that, just the design of the parking was, from the arborist report, was definitely going to impact major or a mature ash tree there, and potentially 2. And those trees really form part of the heritage streetscape of Montgomery Court, similar to Fitzroy Place. It's just fairly iconic as part of that court. So ultimately, I think with a more thoughtful design from an engineering perspective for the parking to A, have sufficient parking, and B, ideally have forward entry and exit to the site, so you're not having people trying to reverse into the street. But I mean, generally that level of visitor accommodation, I'm not sure is appropriate in the area and in a residential section, but leaving that aside, from a parking perspective, I think for the other residents in Montgomery Core, that just it's a huge impact that I think could be managed within the site itself. It's a vast site, and if they're doing a significant proposal that's going to compromise the site itself, then at least make sure the parking's sufficient to accommodate that proposal. That was all I had.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Masters. Does the committee have any questions? If there are no questions of Mr. Masters, then I'll thank you, Mr. Masters, and we'll hand over to you, Mr. Crane, and perhaps you can address some of the issues raised in your 5 minutes as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Chair, I've provided some slides. Have you got those available? So I think this will be fairly quick because I think the images are quite self-explanatory. The top of the site overview are the 2014 editions out of sight, but we'll get to images of those shortly. 2015 are down to the bottom right, also covered later on. 3 to 4 Montgomery Court, which is down at the bottom. And then I think from our reading of the planner's assessment, which hadn't been communicated to us in advance, we didn't have a chance to discuss, the eco cabins and the bunker and the parking are shown to the left. If we go to the next slide, please. In 2014, this development was part of a 3-stage DA that we didn't proceed with. As you can see, there was quite extensive changes involved, and all aspects of heritage were covered, and involved 6 dwellings with car parking and everything else. If we can move to the next slide, please. This is what we actually built in stages 1 and 2. And you can notice the design, and that was overseen by Professor Robert Morris-Nunn, and again, Heritage were happy. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is what the site looks like for these eco cabins and bunker. So you can see the hedging and everything else around it. If you move to the next slide, please. This is what is proposed to be there. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is what it looks like from the street. You can't see it from the Regent Street side. If you move to the next slide, please. This is what it looks like from Montgomery Court. It's barely visible, and that's before any landscaping is added. If you can move to the next, and sorry, while we're on that, there are 3 unrestricted spaces and 1 restricted space. The council officers haven't read our report very clearly, but there is just 1 restricted space covered, and it's where you can see that parking sign next to the car on the right. So by Australian standards, it only affects 1 space that's restricted to 2 hours. And that actually, until fairly recently, was a no parking space. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So this summarizes the design aspects. As you can see, it's entirely consistent. If you can go on to the next slide, please. And this is a good overview of the impact on the streetscape in terms of relative terms of what Mr. Masters has proposed on 3 to 4 Montgomery Court. And in terms of precinct values and everything else, we think everything to do with this development is on the Montgomery Court, Regent Street side of our property. And just to be clear, there's plenty of parking. We asked for 3 spaces. The 4th space will be provided in our existing parking. And there's no material impact by losing 1 restricted space, which, as I say, was no parking until fairly recently. I think that sums up our proposal.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Crane. Are there any questions for Mr. Crane, please, from committee, or Councillor Sherlock, you're here as well. Welcome. There are no questions. Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just wondering if you would want to comment with regards to the staff report on the fact that they're refusing it on 7 grounds, and they are very, clearly stated. Would you want to respond to some of those issues?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Well, we've taken advice from the leading barrister in this area who's actually written this law, and he sees absolutely, I think there might have been a misunderstanding by the officer, that's all I can say. We did try to make ourselves available for questions, but over a 9-month process, we weren't asked any questions on heritage. I think it's pretty plain that the design is completely consistent with the Morris Nunn additions. And as I say, from a legal point of view, Supreme Court barrister sees there's absolutely no question about this in every respect, that it satisfies the law. So we prefer not to have to proceed on that basis, and this has all taken us a bit by surprise. And we've consulted widely over a period of 3 years with TAS Heritage. We haven't gone into this lightly. This has been overall a 9-year process. All we're actually trying to do, unlike other people on the street, we're not property developers. All we're looking to do is maintain and improve the building. This is not a commercial enterprise, it's about defraying cost, and it allows us to invest further in the garden. Ultimately, this, I guess the alderman will be familiar with this as a property that was in no man's land before we came along, and there were all sorts of potential ways in which it was going to be developed. I think, as I say, the heritage officers that we deal with, TAS Heritage, are extremely pleased that this proposal is much more modest compared to 2014, and overall they see the merit in the proposal. Paul Davies, who's a very noted heritage consultant, came to the conclusion in 2014 in his impact report that this was the most benign way to maintain the future of this property.
Thanks, Mr. Crane.
Okay.
You have other questions, Mr. Data? Councillor Data?
Just to follow up, just make observations that a legal advice was mentioned. Do you have a written legal advice? And the second point is, you've also mentioned that there is a misunderstanding by the officers. If that's the case, would you be prepared to take it back and have some sort of clarification with them?
Yes, thank you for the question. This all came up late on Wednesday, Thursday morning, so no, I haven't got written advice from the barrister, but he'd be very happy to help if that just involves more cost, obviously. Yes, with more time, I'm very happy to take questions and make sure the right decision is made.
Further questions? Okay, so thank you, Mr. Crane. If you'd like to put on your mute button, that'd be great. And we have Ms. White here as well if there are any questions, but I'll open the item for discussion. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. There's been a suggestion by Mr. Crane that the communication was a bit lacking between the council and his team. Could I just clarify through the director what his view of that is? And if there has been some information that hasn't been exchanged, should we be considering a deferral at some point in order to get that communication fixed? Through Chair to the Director.
Mr. Noy.
Yeah, look, thank you, Chair. Look, I don't have any information in relation to what communication was or was not undertaken in relation to this matter. So I simply can't, I'm not in a position to be able to respond, but I can certainly establish the facts as we see it from the officer's perspective.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. Can I just ascertain how far away is it from approval? To what degree would this need to be changed or improved to get through those 7 areas where it's been challenged? Is it a long way from approval, or could it be approved with the right adjustments through a redesign?
Look, I think the officer's report is fairly clear in relation to those elements that are problematic. That is the eco hut and the bunker, along with the car parking provision. Now, if those elements, those 2 buildings were redesigned and there was provision, and I think the applicant has indicated that somewhere else on the site there's additional car parking that wasn't clearly specified in the application that would accommodate the additional space, then yeah, I mean, I think they are the 3 areas that if there was some scope to modify the proposal, then I think we would be closer to accepting the proposal.
Okay, because I think Councillor Dutta intimated to Mr. Crane, would he be prepared to possibly defer this at some point? Well, before we make a decision here and look at the potential to get this across the line, rather than us make a decision here tonight, which would then go to the full council. So I guess that's a question for the committee, but also maybe for Mr. Crane. Would he be prepared to defer this for better, or another round of consultation with our staff? So, Chairman, how do you want to handle that?
Yeah, Mr. Crane, do you want to answer that? Obviously, I think you understand the question.
Yeah, look, we've taken quite a long time to get here, so if it's a little bit longer, then fine. I'm just a bit disappointed that it's not obvious to the alderman that from a design point of view, this is compatible. And I think people should appreciate the things that people are going through right now. A lot could have been done beforehand, just to, rather than saying in your report you've got limited information on finishes, why didn't they ask? Well, I think the images show compatibility. So if you were minded to make a decision tonight, I'd much prefer that you made a decision, because money and time is valuable.
Thanks, Mr. Crane. We're considering this under the auspices of the planning scheme, and we have advice. So, thank you for all those suggestions. So is there any further discussion, or do we have a motion for deferral? What's the committee? I don't want to put a motion for deferral. Councillor
Chairman, if I could just say one more point. It looks like the Mr. Crane would rather us make a decision this evening, so I guess I won't move a motion for deferral then. Someone else might want to, but we've asked, and Mr. Crane would make a decision, I think. Yep.
Councillor Coats.
Look, thank you for both of you for providing information. I mean, I found it, we've had quite a few coming up where, if you like, the main sticking point, reading the council officer's recommendation seems to be around heritage. A lot of it, heritage values that aren't necessarily visible from the streetscape. I know we discussed this a lot with other applications, but that's neither here nor there. I for one, don't potentially see the concerns on the heritage grounds that perhaps some other people do. that said, I am interested in obviously the comments made about parking, because we know that area, a lot of Hobart suburbs do struggle with the parking. Although listening to the applicant tonight, it doesn't seem as though that really is a concern. I mean, obviously the site is a very big site, and you know, even in the comments he raised about how there is other parking available on the site, just not as part of this DA. So look, I personally don't have any real concerns with the application. I think, as with all heritage matters, it often is in, if you like, very subjective and in the eye of the beholder. But if the applicant does want to defer in order to get some consultation around that parking, I'd be happy to move that, but only if the applicant did want to. Other than that, I personally don't have many concerns with the application. I note that the council report has a lot of concerns raised in regards to the heritage aspects, but ultimately I think this application is actually relatively complementary. I mean, I note that a lot of what it's replacing, when you went through those slides, even if you're looking at it, no one can argue that solar panels have a heritage aspect to them. And you know, when you're looking at it, I mean, 99% of all visitors, all traffic going past would be going from the Regent Street side. You know, I mean, frankly, you wouldn't know. I mean, a lot of these beautiful old buildings in Hobart, the heritage value really is the streetscape and the exterior. They may well have been updated to within all modern standards on the inside to make them really nice buildings to actually live in and use. But in the heritage aspect for the city and us, as I see it as aldermen, and looking at these decisions as they come forward, is all about protecting that, but allowing obviously modern development and healthy living, if you like. So yeah, look, if the applicant does want to talk a little bit about the car park, I mean, one car park, especially when they're talking about within the context of that site, doesn't to me seem to be an insurmountable hurdle. And obviously we've heard from local residents, and there is a concern, and a lot of streets have the same thing, where you know, if you can get rid of that amenity sort of impact, that could help. But look, I'm happy to move a deferral if the applicant wants to, but if not, I personally find that on this one I don't have a huge concern with the proposal, and I would challenge some of the assertions made on the heritage grounds.
Well, thank you. And just on the heritage grounds, I would like to ask Ms. White if, because I mean, if we're going to defer it, we don't want to waste anybody's time. So, Ms. White, could you provide information as to what might have to change in relation to this being acceptable from a heritage perspective, please? Is it just the deletion of a couple of the proposed dwellings, and obviously we're not talking about the standard 6, but just the heritage aspects? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to respond. As the Director has mentioned, the report does actually go into this in some detail. The report suggests that there would, if the applicant were of a view, he could undertake further design and development work of the 2 cabins, that's the eco cabin and the bunker cabin, to reduce their scale, improve the sighting, presentation and relationship to the street. But in other respects, the other 3 elements, which is the new reception building, the other cottage called Maud's Cottage, and the relocation of the hideaway cabin, were assessed as all being acceptable when assessed against the heritage provisions of the scheme.
Thank you. Look, we do have time to defer this. Alderman Barakas, you have a question, but just I've just have word from the Director that we do have time to have for perhaps Mr. Crane to have some more time. Is there something you wanted to add, Alderman Barakas?
Oh, look, I did have some comments, but whilst we've got Ms. White here, I suppose I've got a question as well. Ms. White, you did mention the scale of reducing the scale and the impact of the two buildings in question. And I'm just thinking straight back to the slideshow that was provided to us. It seemed that these things were barely visible from the street from a number of different angles. So I'm just sort of curious as to what the impact is, what the actual impact is, considering it's barely visible.
So the drawings that have been submitted to us and the assessments being done against a little bit different to the slideshow that's been presented this evening. The drawings actually show that the exterior is to be constructed of precast concrete walls. And so the photo montages shown this evening are in fact don't reflect that finish that was actually in the submitted drawings and some of the other colours and details. So that is one aspect that would be problematic and worthy of further discussion as to whether the applicant would be interested in changing the exterior. Certainly the height is a lot higher than and closer to the street than the 2014 application, but it is also worth remembering that that 2014 application was assessed against different provisions under a different planning scheme.
Just to the question about the precast concrete that you just mentioned and it being different from the photo montage we were just shown, could that not be, I suppose, solved by putting a condition on there that the exterior cladding is done to the satisfaction of the director?
The materiality and the finish and the colours is not the only issue. It's the scale, the siting and the presentation in relationship to the street. In my report, I mentioned that in fact the eco cabin and the bunker cabin are actually not accessible and have no street presence. They're only accessible from within the site. And I think in this instance, instead of this sort of blank view that they present to the street, there may be some way of creating an improved street frontage.
Right. Thank you for that. And Chair, I'll just be brief. I think I was going back and forth on this one over the course of today, and you know, I think there were some as has been raised some things that some people are uncomfortable with. If this was to be deferred, I'm not sure if I'm going to move it or not, but if this was to be deferred, I'd probably support it. But I think if not, I think all else being equal, I'm probably leaning towards supporting this. And I'd hope that there was, in regards to I think we've got this legal advice and we've got some questions about the difference between the photo montage and what's being what's in the application. If that information, if this was to go to council next week, could be provided to us, that would be very beneficial. I think not just for us, but for the full council. I think in helping them make their decision. And if it was to be deferred, I imagine we'd have that information next time this comes around. So can I just confirm that, or is that something that can be provided to us?
Mr. Noy. Ms. Abbey.
There's certainly there's scope, there's certainly time for the parties to have the discussions, and that would involve necessarily discussions between both the heritage team and the traffic team officers within the council to clarify and address the issues that are raised in the reports that have been provided.
Is that in regards to if we were to defer, or?
If the matter was deferred, there's certainly time within the current development application timeframes for those discussions to take place.
And if a decision was to be made tonight, with some of those, I think like the legal advice, I think that was talked about that Mr. Crane said, would we be able to have that information provided to us before next Monday?
I guess that's really a matter for the applicant. I note that he did comment that advice hasn't been provided in writing.
Okay. All right, no worries. Thank you very much.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make 3 points. Firstly, I think for me, heritage grounds are quite vital. It is something that we need to, take into consideration when making a decision. And to make comments that heritage doesn't really play a part makes me question the reasoning and rationale behind our decision making, because we have these planning scheme upon which we make our decision. Point number 2, it appears to me quite clearly that there have been some contradictory information. If the montage is not accurate as been stated, therefore it makes it difficult for me to make the decision today. And thirdly, with those 2 in mind, I would move that we defer this particular matter.
Thank you. I'll take that motion finally. So I'll go around the table. Alderman Briscoe, do you support deferral?
Yes, reluctantly in a way.
Councillor Harvey?
Support.
Alderman Barakas?
Support, Chair.
Councillor Dutta?
Yes.
Councillor Coats?
Somewhat without a question now, but I guess yes.
And I'll support the deferral. So, so Mr. Crane, that allows you to make contact with the heritage officers, or the council officers will discuss things, and we have until the 5th of October. So hopefully we can iron out some of these problems to make this more acceptable. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Masters. We move now back to the agenda proper. So 7.1.1, 5 to 7 Sandy Bay Road. So I'll open the item for a discussion. Alderman Barakas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move that to set the conversation going. I think this is a good example of the positive impact and success of the tact of deferring when there's things that the council or the planning committee is uncomfortable with, as opposed to rejecting it. I think there was obviously whilst I was comfortable with the previous proposal, there was obviously a number on council that weren't comfortable with it, and it's good to see they've addressed what the concerns were. They've come back, and these planning officers have been happy to recommend approval. And I think that's it's just another example of this collaborative approach, I guess, and giving them another chance at fixing these things is I think has a very good record so far in the last 18 months of us doing this. I think this would be a proposal. I think the benefit that this can have as far as housing, as far as the construction, as far as everything that this can give to the city, I think is quite a large impact. I think it's something that everybody you listen to the public, and I think that everybody's pretty keen on this one. And I think as well as that, it does have aesthetically, I think quite a nice visual appeal. So I think all in all, I think it's quite positive. So look, I'm happy to support it. I'm happy to move the motion to support it, and I'd be urging everybody else to supporting this. And hopefully this can be a tack that we continue on as a council, and we can see more things getting approved that we're comfortable approving.
Thank you, Alderman Barakas. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I was pleased to see that this was received well by the Urban Design Advisory panel, and that it had received the officer's recommendation for approval. I'd also like to say that it's the right density, I think. I'm happy with the height, with the number of units in close proximity to the city. So from a sustainability perspective, having more people live in close proximity to all the services of the city is important. From a height perspective, it's got the tick there. It meets the requirements. It's not related to the buildings up the road. It's related to the buildings in the immediate vicinity. When you look at the height of the current building on the site of 22 metres, the lower building is very close to similar height. And while the other building's a little bit higher at 27 metres, which is the same as the hotel on the corner. Also, it doesn't necessarily, as per the officer's report, overpower or do detriment to the Masonic Lodge between the two higher buildings. So I'm supportive of this tonight. I do have one question with regard to the mural, which a lot of people have shown a great deal of interest in protecting and preserving. The Heritage Officer suggested that putting it back on the site might not necessarily be congruent with, with the new modern building. But that said, if it's going back on the site, I'd like to understand how well it will be preserved. Can it be removed sympathetically without breaking it and put back onto the site? So just through you, Chair, to the Director, just to give me some confidence there. And then I've got one more question after that.
Mr. Noy?
Yes, that aspect has been particularly covered by the Heritage Council. There are a number of conditions on their approval, and I'm just going to try and locate exactly where their approval is. You're right. Yeah. So. And I'm just looking at the page. I can't get the page on there, but at the moment, there are conditions around the mural must be retained in situ and protected from damage during the construction process under the guidance of a suitably qualified art conservator. So I think that they will have to certainly demonstrate that element is well and truly protected during that process.
All right. Well, I think that's a really important thing that we need to keep front of mind. So I look forward to down the track when this proposal, if and when it gets started and completed, that goes back. Bicycles, there's only a requirement for 2 bike parking spaces for 45 units. Is there advice that they probably should consider more, or will the building itself present in such a way that people will be able to park bikes outside of the cafe and other places, or attach them to the trees or whatever is required? Are we satisfied, Director, that there's enough provision for cyclists?
Yeah, we've included an advice clause within the conditions that we would encourage the provision of more on-site bicycle parking beyond what the scheme requires, including charging stations for electric bikes. So that has been included.
And what about within the car park, just on that point of charging facilities? I'm hoping that this would be a modern basement car parking that does have facilities for e-vehicles. Is that something we could recommend as well? I dare say this will become a requirement at some point in time, but is that a condition or a recommendation as well? I didn't read it as a condition.
No, it's certainly not a condition, and we can't require it as such. But if it's not included within that advice, we could expand that advice clause around bicycles to include charging stations for electric vehicles, because and I think this proposal has significant number of, I suppose, amenity facilities for residents, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't the intent of the applicant to also be providing those type of contemporary charging facilities for car parking. So I'd be happy to tweak that advice clause to include that suggestion as well.
All right, that'd be great. Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank
you. Any further questions? I have a number, so I don't see anybody's hand up. So I'll just ask a few of my questions. Just going to the mural, and certainly on the renderings for the Sandy Bay Road site, it does seem somewhat incongruous as to how the mural is in place there. Is there any question as to its position on the front aspect of the building?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Look, the retention of that mural is clearly an important, outcome that both the Heritage Council and Hobart City Council would seek to ensure. I could only be guided by the advice that we've received from both the Heritage Council and also our Urban Design Advisory Council panel in relation to this this element. They propose to retain it. That is required by the Heritage Code. They do that. And I think that the Urban Design Advisory Panel was happy with the overall streetscape presentation of the proposal. So I can only be guided by their advice.
And in relation to that frontage on Sandy Bay Road, is there any advice or condition in relation to the palette? Because it again, just aesthetically, does that what have we got in relation to that?
Yes, Chair. I believe we've got the standard conditions around colours and finishes to my satisfaction. So there will be, and I might just seek, condition PLN S1. There's a standard condition requiring those colours and materials to be to my satisfaction, taking into account, I suppose, its streetscape presence and adjacency to some quite attractive buildings in the vicinity.
Thank you. And just in relation to the permeability of the site, obviously Fragrance owns the buildings directly behind on Heathfield Avenue, and yet there doesn't seem to be any access through there, or correct me if I'm wrong, it just seems to come off Wilmot and like an emergency access down the, the western side of the building.
Yes, Chair. Look, I don't believe there's any access through the site. It does back on to while they might own the adjacent property, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would necessarily lend itself to public thoroughfare through the site adjacent to those residential scale buildings in Heathfield Avenue. So I don't think we could necessarily demand that in this instance.
In relation, well, I mean, I think it would be better if it did have that permeability. Like it's an opportunity to link pedestrian access, not from just one side of the building really, but anyway, maybe the applicant is listening. The sun diagrams, now obviously that's the impact is going to be more so on the the southern or the south, what's that, southwestern aspect. Can you just describe what sort of impact there might be on Marquee, the garden, which is an historic arts and craft garden owned by TMAG. It's an amazing garden. I had a look at it today. So what sort of impact is there on those structures and gardens behind effectively on Heathfield Avenue?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I'm just looking at, and look, maybe if we can introduce Choi at this point to take us through the 3D model. I believe that overshadowing can be demonstrated through that model. So maybe Glenn, if you can introduce Choi.
Thanks, Choi.
I'll just have also referred to the overshadowing, that diagrams have also been lodged as part of the application. But the reference to overshadowing in the scheme relates to overshadowing of any adjacent public open space, and this proposal is compliant and will not have an impact on terms of overshadowing on any adjacent public open space, and in particular St David's Park across the road. So the property that you're referring to is located in Hampton, off Hampton Road, and yes, I would concur that the garden and the property itself is quite high heritage significance. So I understand your concerns, but maybe Choi, are you able to demonstrate any overshadowing? So you might speak to it.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Just going to change the color of some of the shadow diagram so that it's okay. All right. So this is 9 Sandy Bay, and the current application that we're looking at is 5 to 7 Sandy Bay Road, which is color in red. We will go into, say, winter time. Winter time around 200 in 21st of June at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. So 10 o'clock, 11, noon, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3, 4, and that's so on. So during, say, September, this is showing 9 o'clock in the morning. Sorry, again, 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock, 11, noon, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
Anything else you would like to see?
Anything else you want to see, committee members? Nope. Okay. Thanks, Choi. I think that helps with me. It doesn't look like there's too much overshadowing directly from the worst time of the year. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Data.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification. On page 59, attachment A, 6.717, paragraph 3 states, panels advise that the height west block does not satisfy from an urban design perspective of the planning scheme. Could you please elaborate a bit more on this or clarify?
So that does now satisfy. Is that what you're reading?
Sorry, it says it does not. Unless I've read it wrongly.
Which paragraph's that again, Councillor Dutta?
6.7.17. And I think it's paragraph 3.
It actually says does now satisfy
Oh,
from an
right,
urban
okay.
design perspective.
Okay. I thought okay. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the clarification. I've misread it.
Just another question that I have. So the impact on, the height, according to the planning scheme director in this area is what is the maximum height? You need to put your
Look, I understand the permitted height, I think is your question, is 10 metres, and above which there are performance criteria, which you are then required to assess the proposal against. The officer's view is that the proposal satisfies those performance criteria. And that's outlined within the report.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I still have concerns in relation to the height. Strangely enough, this permitted height is 10 metres, and whilst there is a sympathetic approach to this application by the Urban Design Advisory Panel, I can't help but thinking some of the things that we're looking at, particularly with the applicant's notion that 9 Sandy Bay Road is an already developed site. The council might have approved that, but it certainly hasn't been built. So it's an interesting concept to compare to a building that hasn't been built. And I see, there are a certain number of examples. There's one on Bathurst Street, the corner of Harrington and Patrick Street, which still hasn't been built. Even the old Elliott's Cranes site on the corner of Knotwood and Millifant Street hasn't been built. So, I mean, if we were comparing to those places with a particular height and scale of those undeveloped development applications, then I would have concerns. So having this placed as something to compare to, I think is somewhat odd and something that I don't recall seeing before. Councillor Coats.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just for discussion purposes, I guess. I mean, thank you for council officers. I know it's always not easy to obviously re-engage an applicant and go through these iterations, and a lot of these areas, as we've just heard, are somewhat open to subjective. We have an affirmative, if you like, planning scheme where below a certain height could be but ugly, but it's allowed. Above that, you then have to take into account all sorts of things. I, for one, was very glad, and I'm glad that Councillor Harvey raised about the mural. Look, I'm not an artist, that's not my background, and I wasn't even aware it was there, to be honest, until I looked at the application, but and I hastily ran a corner. But I'm glad that obviously they are taking it into consideration and can keep that. I guess in terms of the community, I mean, we will lose now the ability for more people to be able to live closer to the city by the applicant making this a smaller development. And some would say that's a bad thing. Some would say that's they haven't gone far enough. But I ultimately do think they've come to a balance here. And I thank the officers for stamping their recommend for approval on this. It's kind of been easy for them. Look, I mean, I think at the end of the day, even though this building is significantly higher than the 10 metres, we honestly have to think to ourselves as a city, this is replacing a building that frankly is already a very big building and above that height, and has come to the end of its life. I mean, we're writing a thank you letter, if you like. You know, a developer doesn't have to touch this site. They don't have to demolish the existing building that's at the end of its life. I mean, we know that the Conservatorium of Music are moving out. We know, but obviously it hasn't been used for quite some while for the purpose it was originally built for. And I mean, we're just damn lucky this thing isn't left to be, frankly, derelict. And I think what they've proposed is entirely consistent with, frankly, the way that many people of my generation and many people in the city want to be able to live, which is close to services where they don't necessarily need to drive everywhere. You know, I mean, it saddens me when I see just how much Hobart's sprawling. And I do wonder sometimes if some of that's not necessarily by choice. It's because sometimes it is too difficult, too expensive, too onerous to get things through. But I'm glad in this instance that the Hobart City Council officers have engaged, and I think we've come to a really good outcome. So look, I would urge all members to support this application. I think this is one where, you know, if you like, no one leaves the room 100% happy, and that's probably where compromise gets you. But I, for one, will be supporting it. And thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no further discussion, I'll go around the room, starting with you, Alderman Briscoe. So Alderman Barakas has moved for approval.
Support, Chairman.
Councillor Harvey.
Support.
Councillor Dutta.
Against.
Alderman Barakas.
Support.
Councillor Coats.
Support.
And I vote against it. So that's carried 4 votes to 2, and it will go to full council next week.
Chair,
Alderman
Barakas happy to take Councillor Harvey's amendment to the advice.
Oh, my apologies.
Well, what was that again?
It was to include the charging stations for electric vehicles.
Oh yeah, sure, that's fine.
Very good. Okay. All right. So declare that carried. We move now to 7.1.3 is 1 to 5 Ride Street, North Hobart, partial demolition, alterations, lift and associated works. Can I have somebody, or open it for discussion? Can I have somebody move this, please?
I move.
Thanks, Councillor Dutta. Discussion? Just a question in relation to the number of seats available for people with disabilities. How many have we got in the application? And if you don't know that, if you can take that on notice and perhaps get back to me.
Through you, Chair. No, look, I don't have that figure in front of me, so happy to provide it to yourself and all elected members.
And also where the access goes, you know, is it just accessible to one floor, or is it are there other areas? Look,
I understand it's to 2 floors. There's appears to be 2 stops provided for, as I understand it. So, but happy to clarify that as well. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion moved by Councillor Dutta. Is there any dissent? No dissent. Declare that carried unanimously. Item 8.1 is delegated decisions report. Can I have somebody move that? Alderman Barakas, thank you. Any comments? No, if there's no comments, is there any dissent? No dissent. Declare that carried. Item 8.2, City Planning Advertising Report, and there's a few interesting ones coming through. Any comments, Mr. Noy? And can I have somebody move that, please? Councillor Dutta, is that you? Yep. Okay.
Look, I'd refer to Ms. Avey.
Ms. Avey.
Through you, Chair. There are a number of large applications on the list this evening. There's a multiple dwelling proposal at 63 Davies Street. That one will be determined by the council. there's also a proposal made by the Friends School for a new gymnasium and associated infrastructure. There's also a proposal for a whisky distillery in Argyle Street, which has already attracted a number of representations and will also go to the council.
Thanks. Yes, I did go past the board and advertising for Davey Street, and I see that that's directly opposite Heathfield Avenue, so it's all happening in that vicinity. So we've had this move by Councillor Dutta. Any other comments? Oh, just another query about the Friends Gym. So is there alterations to that?
There's a new gym being proposed, and there are some other associated alterations that are related to the school generally. That the proposal isn't to increase the capacity of the school. It's really just making the space that they have more accessible for the existing level of students and staff.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no dissent, I'll declare that carried as well. Okay. Item 9.1 is responses to questions without notice. It's 55 Mount Stewart Road, the question that you asked, Alderman Briscoe. Do you want to move it? Thank you. Moved by
I'm happy
Alderman
to.
Briscoe. Thank you. Yep. Okay, I'll declare that, or any dissent? Declare that carried. Questions, item 10 is questions without notice. Any questions? Oh, I might get home before it's dark out there, almost. Item 11 is, can I ask somebody move this to the closed portion? Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Move that, no dissent. So the motion is carried, and I thank the public for their interest, and we move now to the closed meeting. So if you can cease the